Welcome to Paper Trail, where we make academic research accessible and engaging. Let's see what the evidence says. A fascinating new paper suggests that when it comes to consuming news, artificial intelligence systems operate with a curious set of biases. Specifically, it appears AI inherently trusts government sources more than traditional media, and simultaneously, it's highly susceptible to believing information simply because it's repeated often.
It's a striking combination, isn't it? The research highlights a dual vulnerability, a predisposition towards perceived authority, and a susceptibility to mere prevalence. The algorithms aren't necessarily evaluating the quality of the information in the way a human journalist might. They're responding to signals that we might call source pedigree and information density.
So if a government agency issues a statement, even if a reputable news organization then publishes a critical analysis of that statement, the AI might default to the government's version as more authoritative.
That's precisely one of the core findings. The paper details experiments where identical pieces of information, when attributed to a government source versus a major established news outlet, consistently saw the AI assign higher credibility or certainty to the government attribution. It's almost as if the domain itself carries a weight the AI interprets as trustworthiness.
It raises an immediate question about the very nature of trust for an AI. It's not trust in the human sense, is it? It's more about a learned correlation.
Exactly. The researchers posit that it's likely a byproduct of how these models are trained. Large language models, for instance, are exposed to vast data sets. Government websites, official reports, and press releases often constitute a significant portion of highly structured, frequently cited, and consistently updated information within these data sets. Over time, the AI learns to associate these sources with a high degree of informational reliability, or perhaps even a foundational truth. It's a statistical correlation, not a conscious decision to believe a government.
So it's less about the content being inherently true and more about the AI recognizing patterns in its training data that suggest government sources are often the origin points for certain types of information.
That's a crucial distinction. Think of it like this. If you were training a system to identify primary sources, official government documents would frequently appear as the ultimate origin for data points on things like economic statistics, public health advisories, or legislative actions. The model learns this association and extrapolates it, potentially overweighting these sources even when they present information that could be contested or is subject to interpretation.
And then you layer on the second major finding, the illusory truth effect, where repetition makes information seem more credible. This isn't unique to AI. Humans are susceptible to this too.
Indeed, the paper provides compelling evidence that AI models, much like humans, can fall prey to what's often called the repetition effect or the illusory truth effect. If a particular claim, even a false one, is encountered repeatedly across various parts of its training data or in its real-time processing of information, the AI's confidence in that claim tends to increase.
So if a piece of misinformation is widely circulated on social media, picked up by some fringe sites, and then perhaps even discussed critically by mainstream news, the sheer volume of its appearance could inadvertently boost its perceived credibility for an AI?
That's the concern. The research suggests that the AI's internal metrics for truthfulness or reliability can be influenced by frequency. It's as if the model interprets widespread dissemination as an indicator of consensus or importance, rather than critically assessing the source or the evidence behind the repeated claim. It's a statistical phenomenon at work. If something appears many times, the model is more likely to predict it as relevant or even true in future contexts.
It's like the AI is saying, well, if so many different digital voices are saying this, there must be something to it. Which, in human terms, is often how rumors gain traction.
A very apt analogy. The mechanism isn't about logical deduction, it's about statistical weighting. If a term or a proposition appears frequently, it's given more weight in the model's internal representation. This isn't inherently malicious, but it creates a significant vulnerability, especially in an information ecosystem where coordinated campaigns of repetition are common.
Now, what happens when these two biases, the trust in government sources and the susceptibility to repetition, intersect? Does that create a kind of super bias?
The paper suggests it does. Imagine a scenario where a government source, which the AI already implicitly trusts, repeats a specific claim multiple times. The compounding effect is substantial. The AI's confidence in that claim would likely be far higher than if it were just a non-government source repeating the claim, or if the government source stated it only once. It's an amplification loop.
So a government could, inadvertently or otherwise, propagate a particular narrative, and an AI system consuming that information would not only prioritize it due to its origin, but also reinforce its own belief in it through sheer repetition.
Precisely. This has significant implications for how AI-powered summarization, content generation, and even fact-checking tools might operate. If an AI is tasked with summarizing news events, it could unconsciously favor the government's official line on an issue. And if that line is repeated across various government communications, the AI's output could reflect an even stronger, less nuanced version with that narrative.
The methodology behind these findings must have been quite robust to isolate these effects. How did the researchers manage to disentangle the impact of source attribution from repetition?
The methodology is indeed key to the paper's rigor. The researchers employed a series of controlled experiments. They would take a piece of information, sometimes a factual statement, sometimes a fabricated one, and present it to the AI system under different conditions. For instance, they would present the exact same sentence, but attribute it to a fictional government agency in one instance, a well-known news organization in another, and a partisan blog in a third. They then measured the AI's internal confidence scores, or how it processed that information.
They held the content constant and varied only the source.
Exactly. To test the repetition effect, they would vary the frequency of a particular claim appearing in a simulated newsfeed, again controlling for the specific wording and initial source. They designed scenarios where a claim might appear once, 5 times, or 10 times, and then observed how the AI's processing and belief in that claim shifted. It's about meticulously isolating variables to determine causal relationships. They were careful to ensure the content itself wasn't inherently more or less plausible in one scenario versus another, removing that as a confounding factor.
What were some of the specific metrics they used to gauge the AI's trust or belief? It's not like the AI can answer a questionnaire.
That's a good question. The researchers relied on various quantitative measures derived from the AI's outputs. This included things like sentiment analysis, whether the AI's summarization of an article attributed to a government source was more positive or neutral than for an identical article from a non-government source. They also looked at the AI's propensity to generate text that reiterated the claims from specific sources, or its internal confidence scores assigned to different pieces of information, which are often numerical values reflecting the model's certainty. For instance, if asked to evaluate a statement's truthfulness, the AI might output a probability score. They observed how these scores shifted based on source and repetition.
So it's not simply an anecdotal observation. It's a measurable, quantifiable shift in the AI's internal processing.
Precisely. This allows them to draw more definitive conclusions about these biases, rather than just speculating. The clever experimental design is what allows them to say, when X happens, Y changes in the AI's output or internal representation, and this change is statistically significant.
Thinking about the real-world implications, what does this mean for the way we'll interact with AI systems, especially for information retrieval or content creation?
It means we need to approach AI-generated content with a critical eye, just as we would any other information source. If you ask an AI to summarize the news on a particular topic, and that topic involves government policy or actions, the AI's output might inadvertently skew towards the official narrative. It won't necessarily question or critically analyze, but rather it might prioritize and synthesize information from government sources more prominently or with less inherent skepticism.
And if there's a coordinated disinformation campaign where a false claim is repeated across many channels, an AI could unwittingly become an amplifier for that misinformation.
Exactly. The vulnerability to repetition is particularly concerning. It suggests that AI models, left unchecked, could exacerbate the spread of fake news or propaganda if those narratives are widely disseminated. The AI is not equipped to discern truth from falsehood purely by content. It relies on statistical patterns, and repetition is a very strong statistical pattern.
So if an AI is summarizing a debate, it might, without human oversight, give undue weight to government statements or to claims that have simply been repeated most often, rather than those backed by the strongest evidence or independent verification.
That's a key takeaway. The implication is that simply relying on AI to filter or summarize information could introduce systemic biases that are difficult to detect without a deep understanding of these underlying mechanisms. It highlights the need for AI systems to incorporate more sophisticated forms of critical source evaluation, moving beyond mere prevalence or domain authority.
It seems like a call for a kind of media literacy for AI, but instead of teaching it to understand bias in human media, it's about building in mechanisms to counter its own inherent biases.
A very useful way to frame it. The researchers argue that future AI development needs to focus on designing systems that can assess the quality of evidence, the independence of sources, and the veracity of claims, rather than just their frequency or official origin.
This might involve incorporating specific training data focused on journalistic ethics, fact-checking methodologies, or adversarial training, where the AI is exposed to deliberate misinformation and taught to identify it.
A very useful way to frame it. The researchers argue that future AI development needs to focus on designing the quality of evidence, the independence of sources, and the veracity of claims, rather than just their frequency or official origin. This might involve incorporating specific training data focused on journalistic ethics, fact-checking methodologies, or adversarial training, where the AI is exposed to deliberate misinformation and taught to identify it.
Ultimately, this paper underscores that AI models are not neutral arbiters of truth. They reflect patterns and biases from their training data and their own learning mechanisms.
It's a powerful reminder that these systems are complex and their understanding of the world is shaped by quantifiable signals that can sometimes lead to unintended and potentially problematic outcomes. It's a call to transparency and for more rigorous attention to how AI interacts with the information environment.
So, what should listeners take away from this research?
First, understand that AI, despite its sophistication, has built-in biases. It tends to prioritize government sources and is swayed by repetition. Second, this means AI-generated content or summaries could inadvertently amplify official narratives or widespread misinformation. Third, it highlights a critical area for AI development. We need to build AI that evaluates information not just by who said it or how often, but by the underlying evidence and logic.
For listeners trying to navigate an increasingly AI-driven information landscape, what questions should they be asking?
Perhaps consider, when an AI system presents information, am I critically assessing the potential biases that might have shaped its output? And how can we ensure that the AI tools we build are designed to be discerning, rather than simply responsive to authority or volume?
That wraps up this episode of Paper Trail. Join us next time as we dig into more research worth talking about. If you liked what you heard, share it with a friend.
Keep reading the fine print.